It started with a sunset that should have promised peace. The fields at Sunrise Sanctuary glowed gold, the air humming with the evening sounds of horses settling down and the lazy barking of dogs heading in from the pastures. For Hazel Parker, this was the safest place she knew. She moved quietly, almost blending with the dusky shadows as she swept hay into the corners of the barn, humming softly, the routine as comforting as the steady presence of Blaze, the proud mustang who watched her with gentle, intelligent eyes. Hazel was a volunteer, just a high school junior who loved animals more than anything, especially Blaze. She'd come to the sanctuary a year ago, nervous, a little lost, and searching for something she couldn't quite name. She'd found it in the trust of a wild horse, a dog who wagged his tail for her, and the quiet faith of people like Natalie and Jake, the sanctuary's owners. Tonight, she felt responsible, the last one to double-check the gates, the last to call out to Lucky, the brown mutt who followed Blaze everywhere. Thunder rumbled on the horizon, low and distant, as Hazel made her final rounds. She paused by Blaze's paddock, slipping him a carrot she'd saved from her own lunch. Lucky trotted over, tongue lolling, eager for a pat. Hazel grinned, kneeling to scratch his ears. "You two are my best boys, you know that?" she whispered. The wind picked up suddenly. A cloud rolled across the moon. Then, a jarring flicker, and the sanctuary's lights snapped out. Hazel straightened, heart pounding. Power outages happened sometimes. The old lines didn't always survive the spring storms. She pulled her phone from her pocket, turning on the flashlight. From across the barnyard, a dog barked, a sharp, desperate yelp that sliced the calm. Blaze whinnied, pawing at the fence. Hazel's blood went cold. "Lucky?" she called, voice trembling. She ran toward the sound, tripping over a rake in the darkness. The barking stopped. Someone was at the main gate. She saw the glint of a flashlight, then heard a rough, unfamiliar voice mutter, "Come on, you little," and a whimper from Lucky. Hazel froze, her mind racing. She could see only the shape of a man, big, wearing a cap low over his face, dragging Lucky by the collar. The dog struggled, growling and yelping. Hazel wanted to scream, to lunge forward, but fear rooted her in place. A truck engine coughed to life, headlights slicing through the blackness. In that split second, she saw Lucky's face, eyes wide and pleading. Then the truck sped off, disappearing down the long gravel drive. "Lucky!" Hazel shouted, finally finding her voice. She sprinted after the taillights, but they vanished before she even reached the gate. All that remained was Lucky's worn collar, snapped open and lying in the dirt. She dropped to her knees, cradling the collar, tears stinging her eyes. How had this happened? She'd checked every lock, hadn't she? Her heart pounded in her ears. Behind her, Blaze was frantic, pacing and snorting at the fence. He let out a shrill, urgent whinny that echoed across the fields. The other animals stirred. Horses kicked their stall doors. The goats bleated nervously. Hazel forced herself to her feet, clutching the collar, and stumbled back toward the barn. Natalie and Jake burst out of the office, flashlights blazing. "Hazel, what's going on?" Natalie called, rushing to her side. Hazel couldn't find the words, just handed over the collar, her hand shaking. Jake swept his light across the yard. "Where's Lucky?" Hazel swallowed hard, her voice cracking. "Someone took him, a man. He grabbed Lucky and drove off. I didn't stop him. I'm so sorry." Natalie's face tightened with worry, but she put an arm around Hazel's shoulders. "It's not your fault, Hazel. Let's call the sheriff." Hazel nodded numbly, tears spilling down her cheeks. Jake was already dialing, his voice urgent as he gave the dispatcher the sanctuary's address, details of the truck, anything he could remember. Natalie took Hazel's hand, squeezing it tight. "We'll get him back. You did your best." Thunder rolled again, louder this time, as if the world itself was angry. Blaze's distress grew. He pawed at the gate, nostrils flaring, mane tossing in the wind. Hazel moved to his side, pressing her forehead to his broad neck. "I'm sorry, Blaze. I'm so sorry." Blaze tossed his head, nuzzling her hair as if he understood. His whole body quivered with nervous energy. The other horses crowded to the fence, ears pricked, as if sensing something was terribly wrong. Jake returned, face grim. "The sheriff's sending a deputy. Said it could be one of those dog-fighting creeps. They've had trouble in the next county." Hazel's stomach twisted. She'd read about dog-fighting, but it seemed like something that happened far away, not here, not to Lucky. She thought about the way Lucky always slept curled against Blaze's stall, how he barked at anyone who came too close, but always had a wag for the volunteers. How could someone hurt him? Natalie guided Hazel back to the barn. "Let's wait inside. We'll need to give a statement. Jake, check the security cameras. See if anything's left after the power outage." Jake grunted, already moving toward the office. Hazel sat on a hay bale, staring at Lucky's collar. She wanted to rewind the last 10 minutes, do anything differently. "I should have locked the gate. I should have been faster." Natalie shook her head. "Don't blame yourself. If anyone's to blame, it's the monster who took him. We'll get Lucky back, Hazel. I promise." The wind battered the old barn, and rain began to tap at the tin roof. Blaze paced restlessly, whinnying every few minutes. Hazel wiped her face and forced herself up. She went to the paddock, opening the gate just enough to slip inside. She buried her face in Blaze's neck, whispering, "We'll find him, I promise. I'll never let you down." Lightning flashed, illuminating the fields in stark white light. Hazel looked into Blaze's eyes, saw for a moment the wild fire that made him legendary. He nuzzled her again, and she felt deep down that he understood exactly what had happened, and he wasn't going to wait around. As the storm crashed overhead and the sanctuary fell into a tense, grieving hush, a new determination grew in Hazel's heart. Tonight, nothing would ever be the same. The storm did not wait. Thunder crashed with a wild vengeance as heavy rain pounded the sanctuary, turning the dirt paths to mud and rattling the tin roof. Inside the barn, Hazel pressed her face to Blaze's side, clutching Lucky's collar like a lifeline. She barely noticed the flickering lantern Jake set on the table, its shaky glow dancing across the stalls. Natalie checked her phone, fingers trembling as she refreshed the local neighborhood group, hoping someone, anyone, had seen the truck. But Blaze could not be calmed. He paced the paddock, tossing his mane, snorting and whinnying, his muscles taut beneath his coat. Each time the thunder boomed, he jerked his head toward the main gate, nostrils flaring. The air felt electric, the scent of ozone and fear mingling in the dark. Hazel glanced at Natalie. He knows something's wrong. He's never been like this. Not even during 4th of July fireworks. Natalie nodded, watching the Mustang with worry etched deep in her features. Blaze is special. He knows more than he lets on. Lightning flashed, illuminating Blaze's eyes. Wild, determined, and brimming with memories only he could understand. Hazel saw the reflection of that memory. A smaller Blaze, trapped in a gully during a flood years ago, rescued by a shaggy old sheepdog. That moment had forged an unbreakable bond with dogs, especially with Lucky. Jake re-entered the barn, frustration written all over his face. "Security cameras are dead. Nothing after the lights went out. I called the sheriff again, but they're swamped. Bad accidents on the highway. Hazel's heart clenched. She knew she should stay, wait for help, but every cell in her body screamed that time was running out for Lucky. She looked out through the rain-blurred window at Blaze, who pawed at the sagging wooden gate. Suddenly, another crack of lightning and a violent gust of wind whipped the gate on its rusty hinges. The bolt, already loose from years of wear, snapped open with a loud clang. "Blaze!" Hazel shouted, bursting through the barn door just in time to see him hesitate at the open gate. For a split second, he turned back to look at her, eyes burning with purpose. Then, in a flash of chestnut and white, Blaze surged forward, hooves splashing through the muddy yard and into the storm. Jake cursed. "He's out! Natalie, get the halters!" Hazel barely heard him. She was already running after Blaze, soaked to the skin in seconds, her shoes slipping in the mud. She saw Blaze's tail disappear beyond the fence line, heading toward the old service road that snaked through the backwoods. "Hazel, wait!" Natalie called, chasing after her with a raincoat clutched in one hand. But Hazel didn't stop. She stumbled through the gate, calling Blaze's name into the roar of the storm. Her heart thudded with dread and hope. Blaze wasn't running wild, she realized. He was following something. He was searching for Lucky. The flashlight on Hazel's phone cast a narrow, shaky beam across the soaked grass. She spotted fresh hoof prints already filling with water and paw prints, small, scared, beside them. Hazel's mind raced. Was Lucky still nearby? Or had Blaze picked up the scent? She fought to think logically, but fear clouded everything. She glanced back, saw Natalie and Jake catching up. "Hazel, you can't just run off," Natalie said, panting, shoving the raincoat into Hazel's hands. Hazel shrugged it on, not wanting to waste another second. "We can't just leave him. Blaze is looking for Lucky, I know it." Jake pulled out his phone, fingers flying as he texted the sanctuary group chat. "I'll alert the others. The storm's a mess, but we need help searching. Somebody get the pickup. Natalie, stay with Hazel. I'll grab flashlights and radios." Natalie nodded, voice steady, but her eyes fierce. "I'm coming with you, Hazel. No way am I letting you do this alone." She pulled up her hood and gestured toward the field. "Let's stick together. Blaze is smart, but he's out there alone." They moved quickly, guided by Blaze's muddy trail, weaving through the trees at the edge of the sanctuary. Wind whipped the branches overhead. Hazel squinted against the rain, clutching the collar and praying silently. In the distance, she heard Blaze's shrill whinny, a challenge to the dark. She called his name, and for a moment, she thought she saw the shape of a mustang silhouetted by the lightning, moving faster than she'd ever seen him run. Back at the barn, Jake rallied the other volunteers through text and calls. "Blaze is loose, heading north toward the old service road. Lucky's been kidnapped. Suspected dogfighting ring. Spread the word." He copied Natalie's message and posted to every local Facebook group he could find. "Missing. Brown mutt named Lucky. Last seen at Sunrise Sanctuary. Possibly abducted. Reward for info. Mustang named Blaze missing too. Maybe together. Please check security cams, barns, sheds, and roadsides." Within minutes, his phone began to ping. Neighbors offering to check their properties. Truckers promising to keep an eye out on the back roads. Even the high school track coach texting, "My boys can help search at first light." Meanwhile, Hazel and Natalie pushed deeper into the woods. The storm began to ebb, the rain thinning to a miserable drizzle. Hazel's teeth chattered. She stumbled over a tree root, barely catching herself. Natalie steadied her, whispering, "We'll find them, Hazel. We just have to keep trying." Suddenly, Hazel's phone buzzed. A new message from a neighbor. Saw a big truck tearing down Route 6, heading for the abandoned farm on Pine Hollow. Looked like someone had a dog in the cab. Hazel's heart soared. That's them. That has to be them. Blaze knows. Natalie nodded. Let's get back. We need to regroup. Tell Jake and the others. No way we're going alone in the dark with Clint Brody out there. Hazel nodded reluctantly. As much as she wanted to keep searching, she knew Natalie was right. We'll organize a search at dawn, Natalie said, pulling Hazel close. The whole community's waking up for Lucky and Blaze. You started something tonight, Hazel. People are listening. As they made their way back to the barn, Hazel looked up at the sky, clouds breaking just enough to show a few brave stars. She didn't know if Blaze could make it through the night, or if Lucky could hold out against the monster who'd taken him. But she knew one thing. They were not alone. The sanctuary was more than fences and fields. It was hope and courage, and the promise that no one, human or animal, would be abandoned. In the distance, far off toward the dark horizon, Blaze ran on, muscles burning, breath steaming in the cooling air, following the scent of his friend. For the first time since the storm broke, Hazel let herself hope. Dawn would come, and with it, a reckoning. Hazel sat on the cold wooden bench in the barn, the world outside still trembling with the last echoes of the storm. It was well past midnight. Raindrops pattered softly on the roof now, and the only other sound was the steady, anxious snorting of horses, unsettled by the night's chaos. Lucky's collar, still warm from Hazel's nervous hands, lay in her lap, a reminder of her helplessness. She stared into the darkness, letting her memories drift like leaves in the wind. How many evenings had she spent here, brushing Blaze's coat until it gleamed, telling him secrets she could never share with another person? He always listened, unmoving except for the gentle flick of his tail or the twitch of his ears. With Blaze, she never had to pretend. He understood her loneliness, her fear of speaking up, the way she melted into the background at school or even here at the sanctuary. He made her feel seen. Hazel shivered, pulling her knees up to her chest. The air in the barn was thick with the smells of hay and horse, warm and familiar, but nothing could ease the ache in her heart. Every few minutes, she checked her phone for updates. The community group had exploded with activity. Dozens of neighbors promising to keep watch, posting blurry pictures of trucks and stray dogs, offering to search as soon as the sun rose. Jake had even heard from a deputy. We've got extra patrols out. No news yet, but hang in there. Natalie returned from the office, carrying a blanket and 2 mugs of cocoa. She sat beside Hazel, draping the blanket around her shoulders. You should try to rest, honey. It'll be a long day tomorrow. Hazel shook her head. I can't. What if someone calls? What if Blaze comes back? Her voice trembled. It's my fault, Natalie. I should have... Natalie cut her off gently. Stop right there. You did everything you could. Sometimes bad things happen, even when we're careful. That's not your fault. If anything, you're the reason Blaze and Lucky were happy and safe until tonight. Hazel sniffed, hiding her face in the mug. The warmth was a small comfort. Blaze will find him, won't he? Natalie took her hand. If any horse could, it's Blaze. He's the bravest animal I've ever known. And you're braver than you think, too. They sat together in silence for a while, listening to the horses settle and the rain ease to a whisper. Hazel thought about Blaze out there in the night, alone, facing the unknown, driven by love and memory. She pictured his strong legs pounding the wet ground, his ears pricked for any sign of Lucky. She prayed for him to be safe. Eventually, Natalie checked her phone again, reading the newest messages out loud. Mrs. Connolly saw a truck with a crate in the back near the old mill. Coach Harrison's runners are searching the riverbank at first light. Even Sheriff Doyle's wife is passing out flyers at the gas station. Hazel felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they weren't as powerless as she thought. The sanctuary, usually so quiet and isolated, was suddenly at the heart of a storm of kindness. People cared, maybe more than she'd ever realized. After Natalie went to check on Jake and the other animals, Hazel wandered back to Blaze's empty stall. She ran her fingers over the rough boards, remembering the first time she'd met him. He'd been skittish, half wild, untouchable. She'd spent hours just sitting nearby, reading aloud or humming until he edged closer. One night, he'd rested his nose on her shoulder, trusting her at last. Since then, their bond had only grown. He had sank onto a pile of straw, closing her eyes and breathing in the scent of Blaze that lingered on his blanket. In her mind, she replayed their adventures, galloping through the back fields, chasing dragonflies by the creek, competing in the sanctuary's fun show for rescued horses and dogs. Lucky had always been there too, leaping alongside them, barking in delight. The three of them, a little family. A soft noise broke her reverie. Hazel opened her eyes to see Jake standing in the stall doorway, holding a lantern. "Can't sleep?" he asked, voice gentle. She shook her head. "No, I keep thinking, what if Lucky's scared? What if he thinks we gave up on him?" Jake knelt beside her. "Lucky's tough, and Blaze is out there. I've seen that horse do things I never thought possible. He's stubborn. Reminds me of you, actually." Hazel managed a small smile. "I just wish I knew where they were." Jake patted her shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Hazel. Everyone's pitching in. I even got a message from the mayor. Said she'll send city workers out in the morning to help look." Hazel nodded, feeling the weight in her chest lighten just a little. "Thank you, Jake. For everything." He tipped his hat. "Go get some rest. We'll need your eyes sharp at dawn." Hazel stood, stretching her aching limbs. She left the stall and wandered toward the small office where Natalie was updating the sanctuary's social media. Hazel peered over her shoulder, watching her type a post. "Missing, Lucky the dog and Blaze the mustang. Please help us bring them home. Any information is vital. Thank you to everyone searching." Within moments, comments and messages poured in. People promising to check their barns, to share the post with friends, to keep an eye out on the roads. Hazel scrolled through the flood of support, tears springing to her eyes, not of fear, but of gratitude. Even in the darkness, kindness glowed like a lantern. Finally, Hazel retreated to the little bunkhouse for volunteers. She lay down on the narrow cot, Lucky's collar clutched tight, and let herself drift. In her dreams, she rode Blaze across endless fields, Lucky racing beside them, the world bright and safe again. Before dawn, Hazel woke with a start, hope fluttering in her chest. The night had passed. A new day was coming. Somewhere out there, Blaze and Lucky were still fighting to get home, and she would do whatever it took to bring them back. Dawn arrived quietly, as if afraid to disturb the heavy silence that had settled over Sunrise Sanctuary during the night. The first rays of sunlight crept over the wet fields, illuminating puddles and tracks left by the storm. Hazel was up before the sun, dressed in boots and a borrowed raincoat, Lucky's collar hanging from her neck like a talisman. She stepped outside, squinting at the faint blue light. The world felt raw and new. Jake and Natalie were already moving through the barn, checking on the animals, gathering gear, flashlights, first aid kits, walkie-talkies. A few volunteers arrived, yawning but determined, huddled together with coffee and nerves. Hazel barely touched her breakfast, mind racing with questions. Where would Blaze go? Would he stick to open fields or seek shelter in the woods? What if Clint had already taken Lucky far away? She clung to hope, If Blaze was out there, Lucky wasn't alone. Natalie handed Hazel a battered sketchbook and a set of colored pencils. "You're our best tracker," she said, offering a gentle smile. "Keep notes, draw anything you find. Fresh tracks, paw prints, anything out of place." Hazel nodded, heart pounding as she tucked the sketchbook under her arm. She'd always loved drawing horses and dogs, and now her hobby felt like a lifeline. The search party assembled by the main gate. Jake stood in front, his voice steady as he reviewed their plan. "We'll split into 2 teams. Group 1, head north, check the backwoods and creek. Group 2, follow the main road and look for tire tracks, broken fences, any sign of Clint's truck. Radio in anything suspicious. And please be careful. If you see Clint, don't confront him. Call the sheriff." Hazel joined Natalie and 2 local volunteers, Mrs. Connolly and Mason, a college student home for break. They started north, following the muddy service road that ran along the sanctuary's fence line. Hazel's eyes scanned the ground, searching for the smallest clue. The storm had churned the soil, but Blaze's hoofprints were easy to spot, large, deep, spaced far apart. Next to them, Hazel found smaller tracks. Her breath caught. "Paw prints," she whispered. "Lucky's." She knelt, opening her sketchbook and sketching the prints. 4 round toes, a pad, pressed into the soft earth. Mason peered over her shoulder. "How can you tell they're Lucky's?" Hazel shrugged. "He has a funny walk. His right paw turns out just a little, see?" She pointed, tracing the path. The prints led toward a stand of willows, where broken branches suggested something large had passed through. The group pressed on, ducking under the branches. The morning air was thick with the scent of wet leaves and earth. Birds called tentatively, as if testing the quiet after the storm. Every sound felt sharper, every detail more important. 100 yards into the woods, Hazel spotted something caught in the brush, a patch of chestnut hair. She plucked it carefully, showing the others. "Blaze." Natalie's smile was quick and fierce. "He's moving fast. He must know where he's going." Mrs. Connolly radioed the other team. "Fresh tracks up here and a sign of Blaze. We're heading toward the old farm trail." Jake's voice crackled back. "Copy that. No sign on the road yet, but some tire tracks heading west. Stay sharp." As they pushed deeper into the woods, Hazel paused to draw each new clue. The pattern of hooves, a tuft of dog hair on a low branch, a smear of mud where something had slipped on the bank of the creek. Every mark was a piece of the puzzle. She felt the pressure of time, but also a strange sense of purpose. Her drawings might be the map that brought Lucky and Blaze home. The trail led them to a clearing where the creek ran shallow and wide. There in the sand, Hazel found a chaotic mess of prints, hooves, paws, and boot marks. She crouched low, studying the pattern. It told a story. Blaze had paused here, Lucky close beside him, and someone else, heavy, moving fast, had passed through after them. Mason scanned the opposite bank. "Over here. Looks like the fence is broken." Hazel and Natalie hurried over. The wooden fence was splintered, as if a large animal had forced its way through. Hazel slipped through the gap, heart hammering. The grass on the far side was trampled. In the mud, a single fresh horseshoe print gleamed. Hazel drew it quickly, noting the unique nick on the left side, a scar from an old injury Blaze had suffered years before. There was no doubt now. They were on the right trail. They pressed on, spirits rising. Other volunteers called in, Mrs. Bell reporting she'd checked her outbuildings and found nothing but left fresh food and water outside just in case. A local mailman radioed in. "Heard barking from the old Benson farm at dawn. Thought it was just coyotes. But I'll check again." Word spread quickly. The sanctuary's social media posts were being shared hundreds of times, and soon neighbors joined the search. Some drove slowly along the back roads, scanning the ditches for any sign of the missing animals. Others walked the fields, calling Blaze's and Lucky's names, leaving treats or blankets with familiar scents. Hazel felt a surge of gratitude for the support, the sense of being part of something bigger. For the first time since the night before, hope replaced fear. She took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. Blaze was out there somewhere, and the community would not let him down. Natalie squeezed Hazel's shoulder. "You're doing great, kiddo. We're getting closer." Hazel nodded, her eyes burning with determination. "I won't stop. Not until I find them." As the sun climbed higher, the search party reached the outskirts of the old abandoned farm, a tangle of weeds and crumbling barns, once the heart of a prosperous homestead. Hazel hesitated, sensing something electric in the air. Natalie read her expression. "We'll go slow, but I think this is where we'll find our next clue." Hazel opened her sketchbook to a new page, hand steady despite her racing heart. She would record everything, every sign, every step, because this story wasn't just about loss. It was about loyalty, courage, and the power of a community determined to do the right thing, no matter the odds. The search pressed on, and for the first time since Lucky vanished, Hazel believed, truly believed, that their family would be whole again. The world outside the sanctuary was wide and wild, but Blaze had never felt more certain of his purpose. He moved with determination through the early morning haze, guided by a mix of memory and instinct. The storm had washed away most sense, but every so often he caught a faint, familiar whiff, the musky trace of Lucky, mixed with fear and a strange chemical tang that Blaze recognized from a dark memory of his past. Blaze's chest heaved as he pushed through tangled underbrush and crossed lonely stretches of broken highway. The sunrise glimmered on the wet pavement, lighting his path as he veered off the main road and into the shadow of the abandoned farm that everyone in town avoided. The buildings sagged, roof lines warped by years of neglect, paint peeling and windows blank. It was the kind of place that kept secrets and hid trouble. Blaze paused by a rotted fence, his flanks quivering. He remembered being a colt, caught in a flash flood, unable to scramble out of the rising water until a brave sheepdog, gray and gentle, had barked, herded, and pulled him to safety. Blaze had never forgotten that loyalty. Now Lucky was out there, somewhere inside this place, needing him. He snorted, shaking his mane, steeling himself for what was next. The air changed as he stepped onto the property, thick with the scent of old oil, fear, and something sour. He heard voices, a shout, a metallic clang, a muffled whimper. His ears swiveled, homing in. Blaze crept past a rusted pickup truck, careful to stay low, hooves muffled in wet grass. The sound of dogs, too many, caged and agitated, carried from a half-collapsed barn. Blaze's heart hammered. He spotted Lucky, chained to a post in the middle of the yard, tail tucked, body low, but eyes bright and desperate. A large man stood over him, shouting into a phone. Clint Brody. Blaze recognized him instantly. Clint had come to the sanctuary once, years ago, trying to buy Blaze for cheap. Natalie had sent him away saying Blaze wasn't for sale. Not for any price. Now Clint's face was red with anger, his thick hands gripping a metal rod. Every instinct told Blaze to run, but he remembered that sheepdog, remembered Lucky sleeping beside his stall, remembered Hazel's tears. Blaze took a deep breath and stepped out of the shadows. He walked into the open, head high, muscles tense. Clint spun around, eyes widening. "Well, look what we got here," Clint sneered, glancing between Blaze and Lucky. "You dumb horse! You want to be a hero?" Blaze planted his hooves, ears flat, tail flicking. Lucky barked, straining against his chain. The other dogs howled from the barn. Clint stepped forward, swinging the metal rod menacingly. "Get out of here, you mangy beast!" But Blaze didn't move. He remembered the panic of drowning, the sheepdog's fierce loyalty. He remembered Hazel's gentle voice, the promise of safety and kindness. He would not back down. Clint growled, "Fine, I'll deal with you first." He lunged, but Blaze was faster. He reared up, towering over Clint, front hooves lashing the air. Clint stumbled back, startled by the horse's size and fury. Blaze stomped, sending dirt flying. Lucky, inspired by Blaze's courage, growled and snapped at Clint's boots, forcing Clint to dance away. For a moment, everything went still, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. Blaze stared Clint down, his eyes locked on the man's every move. Lucky barked, low and fierce. Clint swung the rod at Blaze's legs. Blaze sidestepped, the rod glancing off his shoulder. Pain flared, but Blaze barely felt it. He bared his teeth, striking the ground with a hoof so hard it echoed like thunder. The chained dogs in the barn whined, sensing the chaos. Clint spat, cursing, sweat beading on his brow. "You're just an animal," he shouted. But Blaze stood his ground. He shifted his weight, ready to charge if Clint came closer. The air crackled with tension. Predator and protector, both refusing to yield. Suddenly, Lucky let out a sharp, desperate bark. A plea for help, a reminder that time was running out. Blaze glanced at him, then looked back at Clint, making a decision. With a burst of speed, Blaze charged the flimsy wooden gate that separated him from Lucky. The old boards splintered, sending shards flying. Clint jumped back, stunned as Blaze thundered past, positioning himself between Lucky and the man. Lucky scrambled to his feet, eyes wide. Blaze nudged him gently, and Lucky licked Blaze's muzzle, tail thumping the dirt. The gesture was quick, but it told Blaze everything. Lucky was still strong, still fighting. Clint, furious, recovered and advanced again, gripping the rod in both hands. "Stupid animals, I'll—" He never finished the sentence. Blaze whirled, kicking out with his powerful hind legs, sending a bucket clattering and knocking the rod from Clint's hands. Clint tripped, cursing, backing away. Lucky snapped and growled, every ounce of courage Blaze showed reflected in his stance. The chained dogs barked, filling the yard with noise and chaos. Blaze stood tall, body between Lucky and Clint, refusing to give an inch. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The rising sun cast long shadows over the yard. Blaze's sides heaved, blood trickling from where the rod had struck, but his eyes never left Clint. Then, in the distance, a new sound. Voices, tires on gravel, a shout that didn't belong to Clint. Blaze flicked his ears. Reinforcements were coming. Clint, realizing he was outnumbered, glared at Blaze. "You win this time," he spat, backing toward his truck. "But you better hope I don't come back." Blaze stomped again, sending a final warning. As Clint retreated, Blaze turned to Lucky, nudging his friend's head. Lucky whimpered softly, licking Blaze's cheek, gratitude shining in his eyes. Blaze looked out over the farm, adrenaline still coursing through him. He had faced down the monster, not just for himself, but for his friend. He had chosen courage over fear, just as someone once had for him. The air was still tense, but the tide had turned. Blaze stood guard, knowing the fight was not yet over, but help was on the way. Somewhere beyond the trees, Hazel and the search party were closing in, hope burning brighter than ever. Hazel's lungs burned as she sprinted up the long, rutted driveway of the abandoned farm, mud clinging to her boots. Natalie was right behind her, one hand gripping her phone, the other clutching the radio tight. They'd followed Blaze's trail, hoof prints, churned earth, Lucky's scattered paw prints, right to this broken-down property, and every step brought a new jolt of dread. The farm loomed up out of the fog, ugly and silent except for the distant barking of agitated dogs. Hazel's heart leapt into her throat. Somewhere beyond the sagging barn and the junked cars, Blaze's silhouette appeared, proud, battered, and wild, standing between Clint Brody and the trembling figure of Lucky. Natalie skidded to a halt, eyes widening. "There!" she gasped. "Hazel, get your phone now. We need witnesses." Hazel fumbled with her phone, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. She tapped the live stream button, her thumb hovering just long enough to see the red circle appear, broadcasting to the sanctuary's followers and anyone else who would listen. Her breath fogged in the chilly morning air. Clint Brody, still panting and red-faced from his tussle with Blaze, caught sight of them. His eyes narrowed, a flash of panic beneath the anger. "Stay back!" he shouted, waving the metal rod as if it would keep them at bay. "This is private property. I'll call the cops on you." Hazel steadied her voice, forcing steel into it. "Already done, Clint. The sheriff's on the way. And so are our neighbors. You're not getting away with this." Natalie lifted her own phone, pointing the camera squarely at Clint. "You're live on video, Clint. The whole town's watching. Step away from the animals." Clint hesitated, his bravado faltering as he realized he was outnumbered and exposed. He glanced over his shoulder, calculating escape routes. The chain-link fence behind him was twisted and loose, easy for a Mustang to break, but not for a man his size. The caged dogs whined, sensing the tension. Blaze snorted, pawing the ground, never taking his eyes off Clint. His hide was scraped and bloodied where the rod had struck him, but he stood tall, every muscle trembling with the urge to protect Lucky. The little mutt pressed against Blaze's leg, growling low, ears flattened and teeth bared. For the first time in his life, Lucky looked ready to bite. Hazel edged closer, voice steady. "Let Lucky go. Walk away, Clint. This is over." Clint sneered, trying to reassert control. "You think a couple of kids can stop me? You're trespassing. He raised the rod, but Natalie's voice cut through, sharp as a whip. "Police are less than 5 minutes out. We're live streaming. Every neighbor in town is watching and recording. You lay a hand on that dog or that horse, and you're going to prison for a long, long time." Hazel's phone vibrated. Messages flooding in from viewers. "We're calling 911. Saw the live video. Help is coming. Hang on, we're almost there." Clint's resolve broke. He hesitated, then threw the rod to the dirt, backing away. "Fine, you want the mutt? Take him. I got nothing to do with this." But Lucky was still chained, the lock tight around his collar. Hazel darted forward, adrenaline overriding fear. She knelt by Lucky, hands shaking as she worked the latch. Lucky licked her face, tail thumping frantically. Hazel glanced up, catching Blaze's eye. An unspoken thank you passing between them. Natalie circled wide, her phone trained on Clint. "Stay where you are, Clint. You're not leaving." Clint's eyes darted around, past Hazel, past Natalie, toward the line of trees at the back of the property. He took a step, then another, edging toward his battered pickup. But the sound of distant sirens pierced the air, growing louder with every heartbeat. Blaze blocked Clint's path, stamping a warning. Clint cursed, swinging wide around the Mustang, but Blaze reared, majestic and terrifying, forcing Clint to stumble back, hands raised. Hazel freed Lucky at last. The little dog bolted into her arms, whining and licking her face, his body shivering with relief. Hazel clutched him tight, tears streaking her cheeks. "You're safe now, Lucky. You're safe. Blaze did it. We all did." Lucky barked, short, sharp, triumphant. The chained dogs in the barn took up the chorus, howling with hope. Natalie spoke calmly into the radio, voice steady. "Sheriff, this is Natalie at the old Benson farm. We've got Clint Brody detained. Animal cruelty, illegal dogfighting, assault. Send backup, and animal control. There are a lot of dogs here." Clint lunged for his truck, desperate for escape, but Natalie stepped in front of him, and Hazel's camera caught it all. Clint's panicked eyes, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he realized his power was gone. Blaze tossed his head, mane flying. He stood between Clint and the only road out, massive and immovable. The neighbors began to arrive. Mr. Bell in his old sedan, Coach Harrison's runners skidding to a halt, breathless but determined. People streamed into the yard, some with phones recording, others just shouting encouragement. Clint's shoulders slumped, his bravado finally broken. "Get that damn horse away from me," he muttered, defeated. Natalie kept her phone trained on him. "You're not going anywhere, Clint. This is over." Hazel hugged Lucky, feeling his heart pounding in time with her own. She looked up at Blaze, who nuzzled her gently, his strength and courage flowing into her. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, managing a shaky laugh. "You're my hero, Blaze. You always have been." Blaze snorted, almost as if he understood. The sirens grew louder until police cruisers screeched into the yard, officers spilling out, weapons drawn and eyes sharp. "Freeze!" one shouted at Clint, who dropped to his knees in the mud, hands raised. Hazel and Natalie backed away as the officers cuffed Clint, reading him his rights. Animal control vehicles pulled up behind the cruisers, and uniformed officers began moving through the barn, counting the dogs, documenting the scene. Hazel kept the camera rolling, narrating through tears. "We found Lucky. Blaze saved him. The police have Clint. Animal control is here for the dogs. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for helping us." Natalie wrapped an arm around Hazel, squeezing tight. "You did it, Hazel. You never gave up." Hazel clung to Lucky, heart finally steadying. All around them, neighbors cheered, some crying, some hugging, others simply standing in silent awe of the Mustang who refused to back down. Blaze, battered but unbroken, stood tall in the morning light, a living symbol of loyalty and courage. As the chaos ebbed and order returned, Hazel whispered a quiet promise. "I'll never let you down again, Lucky. And I'll never forget what Blaze did for us all." The world seemed to tilt back into place as the sheriff's deputies swept through the abandoned farmyard, radios crackling, boots thudding in the mud. Red and blue lights strobed over the twisted metal and sagging barns, casting eerie shadows on the battered pickup and the faces of the crowd that had gathered. For the first time since the chaos began, Hazel could breathe. She clung to Lucky, burying her face in his rain-soaked fur. The little dog shivered with exhaustion and fear, but his tail thumped feebly as Hazel whispered, "It's okay. You're safe. I've got you now." Around them, people watched in silence, moved by the sight of the Mustang and the dog, survivors standing tall despite the ordeal. Blaze was led away from the tangle of broken fencing, his sides streaked with blood and mud, but his head high, ears pricked as if daring the world to challenge him again. Natalie stroked his neck, murmuring soft words of praise. "You did it, Blaze. You saved him. You saved all of them." Police officers cuffed Clint Brody with practiced speed. One read him his rights while another snapped photos of the scene, the battered rod, the splintered gate, the evidence of suffering and violence. Clint muttered curses under his breath, his eyes darting from Hazel to the crowd, but he offered no real resistance. The moment of power was gone. The whole community had witnessed his downfall. Sheriff Doyle, a tall man with a stern face softened by worry, strode over to Hazel. He crouched to her level, concern in his voice. "You're all right? You need an ambulance?" Hazel shook her head, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm fine. It's Lucky and Blaze. I think they're hurt." Doyle nodded, waving over the sanctuary's veterinarian, Dr. Singh, who arrived just behind the animal control team. Dr. Singh checked Lucky first, his hands gentle as he examined the dog's legs, the matted fur around his neck. "He's dehydrated and bruised, but nothing broken," Dr. Singh announced, relief in his tone. "He'll need rest, food, water, and lots of love." Hazel cradled Lucky, eyes shining with tears. "He'll get all that," she promised. "He's never leaving my sight again." Dr. Singh moved to Blaze, examining the scrape on his shoulder and the raw marks where the rod had struck him. Blaze flinched but stood steady, breathing slow and deep. "He's a warrior," Dr. Singh said, bandaging the wound. "Stubborn too, but that's how he got here." Meanwhile, animal control officers moved through the barn, unlocking cages and coaxing frightened dogs into safe carriers. Volunteers wept openly, some whispering words of comfort, others just standing in awe of the scale of the rescue. Natalie coordinated with the officers, making sure every animal was accounted for, every wound documented. The community's phones buzzed nonstop, photos and video from Hazel's live stream spreading fast, neighbors cheering in group chats and online forums. Jake arrived in the sanctuary's battered horse trailer, the back freshly lined with straw and blankets. "Let's get these heroes home," he called, voice rough with emotion. Hazel helped lift Lucky into the trailer, tucking him beside Blaze. Lucky's eyes never left Hazel's face. His trust was absolute. Blaze lowered his head, snuffling Hazel's shoulder, the connection between horse, dog, and girl stronger than ever. The drive back to Sunrise Sanctuary was slow, the roads still slick from last night's storm. Hazel rode in the trailer with Blaze and Lucky, stroking their heads, whispering words of thanks and promises she meant to keep. The world outside blurred by, but inside the trailer was a quiet, sacred peace. Back at the sanctuary, a crowd had gathered. Volunteers cheered as Hazel led Blaze and Lucky down the ramp, each step a celebration. Natalie hugged Hazel tight, Jake wiping away tears he wouldn't admit to. "You did good, kid," he said, voice thick. "You did real good." Reporters arrived soon after, cameras rolling as Sheriff Doyle made a statement. "Thanks to the vigilance and courage of this community, we stopped a criminal and saved countless animals from harm. This isn't just a victory for Sunrise Sanctuary. It's a victory for everyone who stands up to cruelty." Hazel was asked to speak, but her words stuck in her throat. She looked to Blaze, who stood quietly by her side, and to Lucky, whose eyes were bright again with hope. She swallowed hard and managed, "We just did what anyone would do for their family. I'm so grateful for everyone who helped, and for these two. They never gave up, neither should we." Natalie finished for her, stepping up to the microphone. "This is why sanctuaries like ours exist, to give second chances, to fight for those who can't fight for themselves, and to remind the world that every act of kindness matters." As the sun climbed higher, police led Clint away in handcuffs, a line of patrol cars escorting him from the property. The animal control vans followed, each carrying rescued dogs to a safe new home. Hazel watched them go, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders, a sense of justice, of things finally set right. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of care. Blaze and Lucky were treated and given soft places to rest. The sanctuary filled with laughter, tears, and grateful embraces. Hazel sat by their side, sketchbook in hand, capturing the way the light danced in Blaze's mane and the soft tilt of Lucky's ears as he drifted to sleep. Natalie brought food. Jake fixed the broken paddock gate, and the whole community pitched in, cleaning, repairing, cooking meals, and simply being together. By sunset, the sanctuary was peaceful again. Hazel stood at the fence, watching Blaze graze in the golden light, Lucky asleep at his feet. She felt changed, not just by the fear and danger, but by the strength she'd found, and the way so many people had come together for something good. Justice had been served. But more than that, love and courage had won. Sunrise Sanctuary was alive with a gentle energy, different from the nervous tension that had haunted the place just days before. The storm had washed everything raw, but now the morning air was warm, sweet with the scent of summer grass and the earthy musk of horses breathing easy again. As the first rays of sunlight spilled across the fields, Hazel stood quietly at the paddock fence, watching Blaze and Lucky resting side by side in the shade of the big sycamore. Blaze was still limping, his wounds bandaged and his coat dulled by bruises, but his eyes were bright, following every movement of the volunteers bustling about the yard. Lucky's fur was patchy, a line of shaved hair showing where the vet had treated a bite. But he seemed his old self again, rolling in the clover, tail wagging, ears pricked for Hazel's soft whistle. Sometimes Blaze would lower his head, and Lucky would gently nuzzle his nose, both comforted by the presence of the other. The whole sanctuary seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Word of the rescue had traveled fast, and with it came waves of support. Neighbors dropping off bags of feed and boxes of biscuits, children painting "Welcome Home Lucky and Blaze" banners, the local bakery delivering warm bread with a note. "Thank you for reminding us what kindness looks like." Even the mayor stopped by, shaking Jake's hand and promising to push for stricter animal cruelty laws at the next council meeting. Hazel had never seen so many people here before. Where the barn had once echoed with loneliness, it now rang with laughter and voices, volunteers patching fences, grooming the horses, carrying hay, and swapping stories about the night Blaze became a hero. Natalie walked among them, offering encouragement, her eyes often finding Hazel in the crowd. After the first day of calm, Natalie called a meeting in the barn. "We're hosting an open house this weekend," she announced. "Let's thank everyone who helped, share what we've learned, and show how strong this community is." Hazel's heart leapt at the idea. For the first time, she didn't want to hide in the background. She wanted to stand up and tell their story, the real story, with all its pain and courage and hope. The days before the open house were a blur of preparation. Hazel led a team of kids painting new signs, their laughter echoing across the paddock. She worked alongside Mason and Mrs. Connolly, helping to rebuild the barn's front steps, every nail and brushstroke a kind of healing. Blaze watched from his stall, and Lucky followed Hazel everywhere, never straying more than a few feet from her side. Hazel's confidence grew each day. When the reporter from the local news came for an interview, Hazel surprised herself by agreeing to speak. She described the bond she felt with Blaze and Lucky, her voice steady even as her hands shook. "Animals trust us," she said, looking straight into the camera. "They depend on us to protect them, just like Blaze protected Lucky. When we stand up for them, we show what kind of people we are." Natalie hugged Hazel afterward, whispering, "You made us all proud." The open house arrived on a bright Saturday, sunlight glittering off dew-drenched grass. The sanctuary gates were thrown open, and families poured in, children tugging their parents toward the paddocks, teenagers snapping photos with Blaze, seniors reminiscing about the old days when horses like him roamed the hills wild. Hazel set up a table with her sketchbook open to pages showing the search, the clues, the rescue, art that told the story without needing words. Animal welfare officials arrived, giving talks about reporting abuse and the importance of vigilance. Jake offered tours, proudly showing off the improvements volunteers had made. Natalie introduced guests to each animal, sharing how every horse and dog came to Sunrise Sanctuary for a second chance. Hazel found herself leading a small group of kids, showing them how to read hoofprints in the sand, how to speak gently so horses wouldn't be afraid. Lucky trotted beside her, and Blaze nickered softly when she passed, earning cheers from the crowd. At one point, a little girl tugged Hazel's sleeve and whispered, "I want to be brave like you and Blaze someday." Hazel knelt to meet her gaze. "You already are," she said, smiling. "Bravery just means doing the right thing, even when you're scared." The afternoon brought speeches. The mayor thanked everyone for coming together, and Natalie shared a few words about hope and the sanctuary's mission. When Hazel's turn came, her hands trembled, but she looked at Blaze and Lucky in the crowd, and her fear faded. She spoke quietly, but every word carried. "We all went through something hard. Blaze didn't give up on Lucky, and none of you gave up on us. That's what it means to be a family. You don't have to be brave all by yourself. Sometimes courage is just asking for help and trusting that good people will come." The crowd applauded, and Hazel felt a wave of warmth and pride that surprised her. She saw her parents in the back, smiling through tears, and knew she'd finally found her voice. As the open house wound down, new volunteers signed up. Donations filled the sanctuary's old wooden box, and Hazel watched as Blaze and Lucky, now the mascots of hope and resilience, were showered with affection. The story of their rescue had already inspired others. One family offered to foster some of the saved dogs, and another sanctuary sent word of a partnership to help more animals in need. That evening, after the last guests left, Hazel sat beneath the sycamore with Blaze and Lucky. The fields glowed gold in the fading light, and for the first time in a long while, Hazel felt a deep, easy peace. Natalie joined her, settling onto the grass. "You changed things, Hazel. Not just for Lucky and Blaze, but for everyone here. That's real courage." Hazel smiled, stroking Blaze's neck. "I didn't do it alone." The sanctuary was whole again, healed by kindness, strengthened by community, and forever changed by one night of fear that turned into a lifetime of hope. The days after the open house settled into a rhythm that felt sweeter than anything Hazel had ever known. The fear and adrenaline of the rescue had faded, replaced by a quiet pride and an abiding sense of belonging. It was a time for reflection, a time for lessons to be named, wounds to heal, and gratitude to fill the spaces where fear had once taken root. Hazel found herself drawn to Blaze and Lucky more than ever. She'd slip out to the paddock in the soft light of morning, her sketchbook under her arm, and settle on the grass while Blaze grazed nearby and Lucky flopped at her feet. Sometimes she simply watched them, marveling at the bond between horse and dog, how they rested together, looked for each other in crowds, and seemed to share an unspoken language born of hardship and rescue. It was in those quiet moments that Hazel began to truly understand what had happened, and what it meant, not just for her, but for everyone. She turned her thoughts over and over, letting them grow into words, images, and stories. One evening, as the sun turned the sky pink and gold, Hazel sat at the big picnic table by the barn, her sketchbook open to a blank page. A small group of new volunteers gathered around her, middle schoolers, high schoolers, a few college students home for the summer. They looked at her with a mix of awe and curiosity, hungry for the story behind the story. Hazel took a deep breath. People keep asking if Blaze is brave because he's a Mustang, or if Lucky's tough because he's a rescue. But I think bravery comes from something deeper. Blaze wasn't always strong. He was scared once, too. I was there the day he first came here, and he wouldn't let anyone touch him. But he learned to trust and to protect. That's what loyalty is. Remembering the ones who stood by you and being there for them when it's their turn to be afraid. A girl raised her hand. Were you scared that night, when Lucky got taken? Hazel nodded, meeting the girl's eyes. I was terrified. I thought I'd lost my best friend. But what mattered most was that I didn't give up. I remembered all the times Blaze stood by me, how Lucky always came running when I called. I owed it to them to be brave, too, even if I was scared. She flipped her sketchbook to a page showing Blaze rearing between Clint and Lucky. Lucky crouched but ready to defend himself. Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do what's right anyway, especially for someone who can't fight for themselves. The group was quiet, letting the words sink in. Mrs. Connolly joined them, setting down a tray of lemonade and cookies. You're quite the storyteller, Hazel, and a fine mentor. Hazel blushed but smiled. I'm just sharing what Blaze and Lucky taught me. As the days went on, Hazel's role at the sanctuary changed. She was no longer the shy, uncertain volunteer who hung back in the shadows. She led new arrivals through the routines, taught them how to approach the nervous horses, and showed them how to read animal body language. She gave talks to visiting school groups, always highlighting the importance of standing up to cruelty, not just for animals, but for anyone who needed help. Blaze and Lucky became the unofficial mascots of Sunrise Sanctuary. Their story was shared on social media, in local newspapers, and at animal welfare conferences. Donations poured in, and so did new volunteers, some inspired by Hazel's words, others simply drawn to the idea that ordinary people, even teenagers, could make a difference. Hazel helped organize new education programs at the sanctuary. She set up workshops for kids on how to spot and report animal cruelty, taught classes on basic animal care, and worked with Natalie to create a Courage Club, a group that encouraged young people to share stories of standing up for what was right. One afternoon, Hazel stood in front of the club, Blaze grazing behind her. Lucky sprawled in a patch of sunlight at her feet. When you see something wrong, it's easy to look away or hope someone else will fix it, Hazel told the group. But real loyalty means you step forward, even when it's hard. That's what Blaze did for Lucky. That's what you can do too. The children nodded, some scribbling notes, others just listening with wide eyes. Hazel felt the power of the moment, the way a single act of courage could ripple outward, changing lives she might never even meet. Blaze nickered softly, as if in agreement, and Lucky thumped his tail. Hazel knelt, hugging them both. You're my family, she whispered, and you make me brave. As summer turned to fall, the sanctuary continued to grow. More animals arrived, some frightened, some angry, some simply in need of a second chance. Hazel met each one with the patience she'd learned from Blaze and the gentleness Lucky had always shown her. The story of their rescue became a touchstone for everyone who came through the gates, a reminder that compassion and courage could outlast even the darkest night. Natalie found Hazel one evening by the fence, watching the sunset with Blaze and Lucky at her side. You know, you've become a real leader here, Natalie said, smiling. Hazel shrugged, looking down. I just did what I had to. I wanted to help them. I wanted to help you. Natalie nodded. And you did. You helped all of us. Sometimes all it takes is one voice, one act of courage to change everything. Hazel smiled, feeling the truth of those words deep in her chest. She looked at Blaze, then at Lucky, and then out over the fields, golden and endless, full of promise. The lesson was clear now, as bright as the sunrise over the sanctuary. Loyalty means remembering kindness, and courage means returning it, no matter what. That was how families, communities, and hearts were built. And that was how Hazel knew she'd always find her way home. The story of Blaze, Lucky, and Hazel traveled far beyond the white fences of Sunrise Sanctuary. What had begun as one stormy night and a desperate search soon became something much bigger, a spark of hope and change that spread through the community and beyond, finding its way into hearts, homes, and headlines across the region. News stories called Blaze the Mustang Hero and Lucky the Miracle Mutt. Videos from Hazel's live-streamed rescue racked up thousands of views, inspiring a wave of messages, some from people who'd never even seen a horse in real life, all touched by the courage of one Mustang, one dog, and one brave girl who refused to give up. Donations poured into the sanctuary, arriving from distant towns and even other states, each accompanied by a note. For Blaze and Lucky, thank you for reminding us what's possible. The sanctuary's board used the funds to expand the paddocks, repair aging barns, and create a special Blaze and Lucky Fund to help cover rescue and rehabilitation for future animals in need. Natalie worked late into the night, writing grants and speaking at animal welfare events. Jake grumbled about all the paperwork, but even he couldn't hide his pride as the place blossomed into a true haven for lost and broken creatures. Hazel found herself at the center of a movement. Her days became a whirlwind of school, chores, and interviews, first with local radio, then regional news. She never got used to being called a hero. She always redirected the praise. Blaze is the hero, Lucky too. I just did what anyone would do for their friends. But her words, honest, humble, struck a chord. She was asked to speak at schools, animal shelters, and even the county council, where she told officials how cruelty thrives in silence and how communities could fight it by being vigilant, speaking up, and never turning away. That fall, the town council met in a packed chamber to discuss new animal cruelty laws. Hazel was there, sketchbook in hand, as Natalie and Dr. Singh presented evidence from the rescue. Blaze and Lucky couldn't enter City Hall, but their photos, Blaze's proud stance, Lucky's trusting eyes, hung at the front of the room. By the end of the night, stricter laws passed with a unanimous vote. Hazel smiled as the council chair said, "Let this be our promise. Sunrise Sanctuary showed us what's possible when we stand together." Back at the sanctuary, life settled into its old rhythms, now touched by new hope. Blaze's wounds healed, leaving only faint scars hidden by his chestnut coat. Lucky gained weight, his fur glossy and thick. The two were inseparable, walking the fence line together, napping under the sycamore, inspiring every visitor who came to meet them. Hazel grew into her role as both caretaker and advocate. She took charge of the Courage Club, watching as new members joined every week, each eager to help, each carrying a story of their own. Sometimes parents visited the sanctuary not just to volunteer, but to ask Hazel how to help their kids be braver, kinder, more resilient. She answered the same way every time. Show them what loyalty looks like. Help them believe that courage doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you act, even when you are. And always, always return kindness when you receive it. On the anniversary of the rescue, the sanctuary hosted a celebration that brought together everyone who'd played a part. People shared stories of how they'd first heard Blaze's whinny through the storm, how they'd watched the live stream in tears, how the rescue had changed the way they looked at their own animals. Natalie gave a speech, her voice bright with pride. This sanctuary is more than a place for animals. It's a promise to never ignore suffering, to always fight for what's right, and to remember that even the smallest act of courage can echo through an entire community. Hazel spoke last, nervous but determined. She told the crowd about that first terrifying night. The power outage, the desperate chase, the helplessness she'd felt, and the moment when she realized she wasn't alone. I learned that courage is a choice you make, not just for yourself, but for those who can't fight for themselves. When you return kindness, you become part of a chain that can change the world. As the sun set behind the fields, Blaze and Lucky stood at the fence, watching as families said their goodbyes. Hazel looked at them, her friends, her inspiration, and felt the full weight of their journey. She realized the story would never really end. It would live in every volunteer, every rescued animal, every new law, and every person who chose hope over fear. In the following months, the sanctuary's story sparked similar rescues in nearby towns. Other sanctuaries and shelters reached out, asking for advice, inviting Hazel and Natalie to speak. Animal control officers, once stretched thin and discouraged, found new energy in the wave of public support. Even the high school launched a service club named Blaze's Brigade, dedicated to helping animals and spreading compassion in the community. Hazel's own world expanded, but her roots never changed. She still spent every quiet morning with Blaze and Lucky, sketching their shapes against the misty dawn, whispering thanks for second chances. She never forgot what they'd survived, or what they'd taught her about loyalty, courage, and the life-changing power of kindness. One chilly evening, as Hazel closed the gate and watched the sun sink behind the sanctuary, Natalie joined her. "You know, Hazel, some stories start with loss, but the best ones end with hope." Hazel smiled, feeling the truth settle deep in her bones. "That's how I want to live," she said, "facing my fears and helping the ones who can't fight for themselves. Just like Blaze. Just like Lucky." Natalie nodded, her arm around Hazel's shoulders. "And just like you." As darkness fell, Hazel listened to the peaceful sounds of the sanctuary. Blaze's steady breath, Lucky's contented sigh, the gentle rustle of horses settling in their stalls. She felt a sense of purpose as vast as the starlit sky. True courage means facing your fears, not just for yourself, but for those who depend on you. When kindness is returned, it changes everything. If this story touched you, like and subscribe for more true tales of loyalty, rescue, and second chances.